This year sees St. Peter's Church in Berkhamsted celebrate their 800th anniversary. We thought this would give us a great opportunity to look into the collections here at Dacorum Heritage and give you a brief insight into what life was like in medieval Dacorum. Although Dacorum has been occupied since prehistoric times, it truly began to rise to prominence in the medieval era. And it is in fact from this period that we get the name Dacorum, which is believed to be a Latin mistranslation of the Anglo-Saxon word for the Danes. However, the area's exact relationship to the Danes is unknown, as no Danish artifacts have been uncovered, although the area would have been in close proximity to the Danelaw and likely formed a frontier between Viking and Saxon-controlled areas. The first major marker of medieval activity in Dacorum is St. Mary's Church in what is today called North Church. The church has several walls and architectural features that are consistent with pre-Norman conquest Anglo-Saxon churches, but the actual date for the foundation of the church is unknown, although it certainly existed by the time of the Norman invasion. The invasion of the Normans in 1066 placed Dacorum in the centre of political events, as the final surrender of the English took place in Berkhamsted, which had strategic importance, being on the primary trade route between London and the north. In commemoration of this surrender, and as a marker of the importance of Berkhamsted, a castle was constructed by Robert of Mortain, half-brother of William the Conqueror, and it would continue to remain in royal hands for much of the medieval period. Dacorum continued to prosper over the following centuries and played host to a number of famous medieval figures, including Thomas Becket, who was granted ownership of Berkhamsted Castle by Henry II in 1155 and continued to hold it until he fell out of favour with the king in 1164. The 13th century was an important time for Dacorum. The early part of the century saw a successful siege of Berkhamsted Castle in 1216 by the French Prince Louis, who had been invited to England by barons opposed to King John's rule. After the death of King John, Louis withdrew from England and the castle again returned to English royal rule. St. Peter's Church was also built around this time, and its first rector was installed in 1222. The latter half of the century saw the first efforts to construct a palace at King's Langley by Eleanor of Castile, wife of Edward Longshanks, and their son Edward of Carnarvon, later Edward II, spent much of his youth at the palace. Favourite of Edward II, Piers Gaveston, was also invited to live with him at the palace, and the two had a relationship that was so controversial at the time that Gaveston was exiled on 3 separate occasions. After his death in 1315, at the hands of nobles who had grown disgruntled at his unique access to the king, Gaveston's body was moved to King's Langley Priory to be interred. There is today a monument to him close to the spot where he was killed. This year also saw Tring gain its charter as a market town. The founder of the House of York, of Wars of the Roses fame, Edmund of Langley, was born at King's Langley Palace in 1341. His brother Edward, the Black Prince, spent his honeymoon at nearby Berkhamsted Castle in 1361, and it served as the administrative centre of his holdings in his role as Duke of Cornwall until he died there in 1376. Geoffrey Chaucer, author of the Canterbury Tales, also spent time at both King's Langley Priory and Berkhamsted Castle in his role as the King's Clerk in the late 1390s. The 1400s saw England racked by the Wars of the Roses, and the castles of Dacorum changed hands several times, culminating in Cecily, Duchess of York, mother of Richard III, living in Berkhamsted until her death in 1495. The castle then fell into disuse among the ruling classes, although King's Langley continued to be a royal residence until the reign of Henry VIII. And, with the closing of the 15th century, the medieval period came to an end.